Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to start with the first briefing of the day. My name is Amnon Kushnir. I'm the Director of Incident Response for Sygnia.
Hi, my name is Oren. I'm an Incident Response Manager for Sygnia. Sygnia is a consulting firm that specializes in helping organizations that experience security breaches. And our story today starts when a client contacted us and requested our assistance in responding to a financial extortion attack. When we went on the scoping call, it sounded just like another regular IR. But at this stage, little did we know that we are in for a roller coaster ride. What started as a simple IR turned out to be a battle against three very capable, very persistent threat actors. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start with threat actor alpha. Threat actor alpha are financially motivated threat actors. They are king of cloud-based attacks. They know how to bypass MFA, how to bypass conditional access rules, and our client had a multi-vendor cloud environment accessible via a federation service. Threat actor alpha managed to compromise a highly privileged administrative account that granted them access to all of these environments. Once in, threat actor alpha executed almost every cloud-based attack in the book. In addition, they collected IT-related documents. That information allowed them to understand how to connect to the organization's VPN. So they actually pivoted from the cloud to the on-premise environment via VPN using the privileged account. And once in the on-premise environment, they executed different attacks. One of the notable attacks that they used was to deploy an EDR as their CNC channel. So put yourself in our shoes. You came to investigate a compromised host, and you see that it's monitored by an EDR solution. You request the client access to the console of the EDR, and they answer, we're sorry, we are not using this specific EDR solution in the organization. So you go back to the host, you investigate it, and you realize that the threat actor deployed the EDR and used its capability to execute code on machines to create a custom CNC channel. So we used the information that we collected during the investigation in order to create a remediation plan. And as part of the remediation plan, we also configure post-breach monitoring. This is important because we know that threat actors are persistent. They will try to regain access to the environment. Now, it's easy to monitor for IOCs, right? IP addresses and hashes. But it's also easy for threat actors to just purchase a new IP address or change their tools. So we always create custom detection scenarios, and we also want to monitor for the TTPs. Another thing that we do is that we monitor the implementation of the remediation team. So I know it sounds a bit strange. Why would we monitor the blue team, the defenders? But from our experience in large environments, sometimes people revert the remediation measures. Why? Because things worked. It was easier to connect before all the hardening, the MFA, the conditional access rules. So they might revert the plan and allow the threat actors to regain access. So we monitored for that.
So as part of this monitoring effort, after a few days, we just see new alerts being fired on the same high-privileged account that was used by threat actor alpha. Now, in parallel to starting an investigation about what is the nature of this activity, we went and asked the client, hey, are you familiar with this activity? In our investigation, we revealed that this user account was re-enabled by a service account. Then the client was able to confirm that they are not aware of such activity. So we immediately thought, do we just see threat actor alpha returns? Now, it was true. This was the same high-privileged user that was used by threat actor alpha. However, there were several differences. One of the differences was that the activity was originated from a server that was not correlated with the known scope of compromise of threat actor alpha. When we dig deeper in the server, we understand that there is an IIS module that was installed, although this server is not a web server. So we saw what kind of pages this IIS module serves, and there was only one page, which was a China Chopper web shell. Again, not a tool that was correlated with threat actor alpha known tools. And then when we took another look on the IIS access log, we were able to see that the access to the China Chopper web shell is dated back years ago. This is not correlated with the time frame of threat actor alpha, and this led to the imminent conclusion that we have just discovered a new active campaign of another threat actor. Let's introduce threat actor beta. Threat actor beta is a China Nexus state-sponsored threat actor with the espionage as a motivation, different than the extortion of threat actor alpha, and they had a prolonged operation many years in the client's environment. The main TTP of this threat actor was web shells, web shells, web shells, web shells, all kinds of them, different variants of China choppers, some with encryption, some without encryption, some were inserted into legitimate web pages, and they were used in order to perform every phase of the attack, as from accessing the network from external, and then pivoting into the internal network and deploying it on internal web servers. And with a specific unique payload, they were able to tunnel themselves between the different China Chopper web shells, therefore creating some kind of tunneling mechanism. And this was the only persistent tool that they have used to conduct the attack. Now, another interesting fact about threat actor beta is that they have operated specifically from IP addresses of a device of a Soho router, which was a specific version of a Zixel device, legacy Zixel device, that they probably have compromised. Now, let's take a step back and talk about what led us to this discovery. So this is an effect that we called a remediation domino. Basically, when we put up a comprehensive remediation plan into a large-scale network, we are shaking the box and creating a new norm for the network. So basically, even for the IT personnel, they need to adapt and change and work according to the new procedures. And this is also true for threat actors with prolonged operations. So threat actors that remain several years in the network, they know that from time to time there will be changes in the IT infra. So they need to adapt. However, this time we have the advantage, and we put the remediation plan. We investigated and enhanced the visibility, and this creates us a golden time frame that the threat actor adapts, and we have the eyes on the target. Then we can see either anomalous activity that is originated by bad practices of IT personnel or threat actors. So changes do create opportunities. However, it can be for both sides. If we will perform a not well-defined remediation plan, then we might be able to connect the previously segmented network, allowing the threat actor to move to different places that they were not accessible before. This time, the remediation was on point, and the advantage was for us, so we were able to catch the new threat actor. So as soon as we understood that there is a live campaign, what do we want to do? We want to investigate and to understand what is the nature of this attacker. So there is a small problem with that. APTs are OPSEC aware. They will tamper logs, they will delete logs, they will disable security tools. Basically, they will do anything in their capabilities in order to evade detection and to conduct their operation. One of the proposed solutions in order to deal with that is what we call a stealth monitoring. Stealth monitoring is an out-of-band monitoring that will be implemented that will be out of the eyes of the threat actor. For example, port mirroring. We can create a copy of the traffic into another server that is not a domain join, and then monitor the activity between different compromised servers in this specific server that the threat actor does not have the knowledge on. And by this, we are able to understand many of the activities of threat actor beta.
So we were finalizing the investigation of threat actor beta, and we investigated this host that was compromised by threat actor beta. It had web shell deployed on it. And when we analyzed the host, we identified a new tool, plugix, which was not used by threat actor beta in the past. We tried to understand how plugix got to this specific host, and we identified that it was deployed during an RDP session. Both plugix and RDP are not TTPs of threat actor beta, and when we looked on the timeline of activity, it was not the timeline that characteristic of threat actor beta. This led us to the conclusion that we have a new third live campaign within the same network. Let me introduce you to Velvet Ant. Velvet Ant are a Chinese APT group that specializes in espionage operations. They maintained access to the network for more than 3 years, during which they were highly evasive. They disabled the EDR solution, they tampered logs, they performed time stomping, anything that they could do in order to remain hidden inside the network. They're also very fond of hijacking execution flow. From DLL sideloading to DLL search order hijack, they will find creative ways to load their payload into the memory. Some of the tools that they used in this campaign were plugins and shadowpad, two remote access trojans that are characteristic of Chinese groups, stowaway proxy, which was used in order to tunnel traffic throughout the network, and WMI exec, which is part of the in-packet toolset. It was used in order to execute code remotely on hosts. So we investigated Velvet Ant, we understood how they work, and now we want to kick them out of the network. But how do you eradicate an APT? We usually take the kill switch approach. Kill switch means a coordinated eradication that takes place simultaneously. It's a big event. We ask all the relevant people to come on site. We involve different teams inside the organization, IT, security, application owner, network, and we usually do it off hours during weekends or night, and we need to clean everything in a single event and harden the network. The reason that we do a kill switch is that if you try to gradually eradicate an APT from the network, you are giving them the opportunity to adapt. They can change their TTPs, they can be more hidden inside of the network, and you lose sight of them. This is also why we implement post-kill switch monitoring. We want to be able to quickly detect and respond to any re-entry attempts into the network. Okay, so we created a plan. We had a successful kill switch operation. The network is clean, and now we just sit and wait. But several days after the successful kill switch, we had alerts being triggered on the deployment of plugins in the network. This took us by surprise. How can this be? We eradicated the threat actor, the network is clean, everything is blocked. How did they get access again to the network? So we investigated the compromised host, we pull out the plugins configuration file, and we see that it's communicating with an internal IP address. So the threat actors adapted. They changed their tactics after we implemented the eradication, and now they were operating from inside the network instead of an external CNC server. We went to that internal IP address to investigate it, and we identified it as a legacy host. And in this organization, the EDR solution does not support legacy operating system, which means this server is not monitored as well as other servers in the same segment. So we try to understand how plugins was deployed on the legacy server. We again try to extract the plugins configuration, and to our surprise, this time there was no CNC configured inside of plugins. Now, this is really strange because plugins is a remote access Trojan, and to access it, you need a CNC server. So it was a bit of a mystery, but we conducted memory forensic, we analyzed the process that was injected with plugins, and we managed to identify another internal IP address. This IP address belonged to a legacy F5 big IP device. F5 big IP is a firewall load balancer. Here it was installed in the perimeter of the network. Let me take you through how the Velvet Ant attack flow worked. So we have here the external CNC server, and we have the compromised legacy F5 load balancer. The threat actors deployed several tools on the F5 device. One of them was Velvet Sting. Velvet Sting would poll the CNC server once an hour, searching for commands to be executed on the device. Once the threat actor wanted to gain access into the environment, they would connect to the CNC server, and leave there a command that needs to be executed. For example, to create an SSH tunnel. Using that SSH tunnel, the threat actors connected to the legacy F5, and from there, they connected to the plugix instance that was deployed on the legacy server. From the legacy server, they compromised new hosts in their environment and deployed plugix. Now, this is the point in which our alerts started to trigger, because while the legacy server was not monitored, the rest of the network was monitored, and we had alerts that being triggered. Now, once a new host was infected with plugix, it would connect back to the legacy server and use it as its internal CNC server, allowing the threat actor to remotely access it. So we needed to update the Velvet Anti-ID, and now it includes operating from network devices, and it includes two new tools, Velvet Sting and Velvet Tap. Velvet Tap is a network tapping tool. Here it was used in order to tap the F5 management interface. Okay, so I know what you may think. Our story ends here, right?
So think again, because after several months, we do see traffic being originated into previously compromised assets, basically kind of a lateral movement attempt from an unfamiliar internal IP address. This source IP address was a source IP address of a management interface of a Cisco Nexus switch device. Now, when and if should we see traffic originated from a management interface of a switch device? The answer is no, we shouldn't, okay? Management interface should only receive inbound traffic to manage a device, and definitely should not originate traffic to other applications or systems within the network. So we understood that here there is a very big anomaly, and we have to do a deeper investigation. So first of all, we need to understand what is exactly a Cisco Nexus switch device. So this kind of switch device is not your day-to-day switch device that you will see in your home, okay? These are switch devices that are used in data centers as the backbone of the data centers, responsible for redirecting traffic hundreds of gigs per second. So this is something that you rarely see during investigation. So in order to understand what there is to investigate and how to investigate, first we need to understand what is or how it is being built. So this specific Nexus device that we have investigated was 7000 series or N7K, basically built with the box itself, the patch panel, and the first application that it runs is a Linux underlay, which is kind of a Linux subsystem. On top of that, there is the NXOS, which is the Cisco application that the end user interacts with. So whenever you will perform an SSH connection to manage the device, then the NXOS will give you the prompt, and you will be able to execute a specific set of closed commands that are very similar to Cisco iOS commands. Now, here we understand that there are two applications that we can investigate. One is the NXOS application, and the second is the Linux underlay. However, the Linux underlay system is not accessible for us. So we need to start with the easy things that we can do, and this is to investigate the NXOS layer. And what we found there amazed us. When we take a look on the show accounting log, which is basically the commands that were executed on the device itself, we see that during an administrative session, there was one Cisco command that had a very weird parameter. As you can see in the screenshot, this parameter is being decoded into base 64 and decoded as sh bootflash1. Definitely should not be as the parameter of a regular Cisco NXOS command. We immediately reported this issue to Cisco, and Cisco were able to confirm that we actually have seen a 0-day exploited in the wild by a Chinese threat actor. So this was very exciting. As you can imagine, it's not a daily thing to discover. And this kind of a vulnerability is a command injection type, meaning that whenever threat actor will try to perform it, they will switch context from the NXOS context into the Linux underlay. So in that moment, we needed to get the forensic artifacts out of the Linux underlay. For this, we had contacted Cisco, and they give us further tools to collect logs from it. And what we've seen there even was more exciting, right? So here you can see the bash history that was extracted of the user root from the Linux underlay. And we can see that there is a command named vi1, basically editing of a file named 1, probably inputting some interactive content within this file, and then decoding it into a file named 2. Afterwards, we see that there is a copy of another binary named CURL, or the very known CURL binary, into /root UFDM. UFDM is a binary that exists by default on Cisco Nexus switch device, however, not from /root. Just after that, we see the threat actor leverage the LD preload technique in order to load /root/ufdm.so, which is the renamed version of the file 2, which is the decoded payload, and pointing into /root/ufdm, which is the CURL. Basically, hijacking execution flow of a shared object, very similar to the known TTPs of Velvetant, which was the DLL hijacking and loading the payload in this kind of mechanism. Right after, we see kind of sanity commands. They need to check if their things actually works, right? So process list, netstat, and then removal of the tools from the disk. So we understand that there might be something actually running on the device, and using PS on the Linux level, we can see the /root/ufdm actually executed on the device itself. Moreover, when we are performing the netstat command on the Linux, we don't see any bind to a port. Weird. So we are going back to the NXOS layer. There, we are using the show sockets command with the PID of the /root and the /root/ufdm, sorry, and then we see that the port 12800 is bind to this specific process, meaning that something is actually running on the device.
So the threat actor removed UFDM from the device, but it's still running in memory. So we resorted to memory forensic in order to reconstruct the malware, which we track as Velvet Shell. Velvet Shell is built from two open source tools. The first one is TinyShell. TinyShell is actually a Unix backdoor that allows the threat actor to upload files into the device and execute them remotely. This means that the threat actor no longer needs to connect via SSH to the device. They can just upload their files and execute them. The second part of Velvet Shell is TreeProxy. TreeProxy allows the threat actors to tunnel their traffic through the Nexus switch. And this is why when we investigated the attacks, we saw the switch as the origin of the malicious connection. So both TinyShell and TreeProxy are open source. They're available on GitHub. We saw in the past different threat actors leveraging them, but this is the first time that we found both tools in a single binary. Another interesting part is that TinyShell exists online in different versions. And here Velvetant chose to use not the official version, but another fork of it that has the hist file parameter in it. This means that they can unset the hist file, and this will remove the bash history. So if the threat actor wants to remove all the commands that they executed on the device and make the investigation more difficult, they can easily implement that functionality. Let me take you through the Cisco Nexus attack flow. So the threat actor connected to a legacy Linux server, which was not monitored. From there, they connected using valid credentials over SSH to the Cisco Nexus switch. Once in, they executed the reconnaissance command, extend and peek commands, attempted to do lateral movement, and then when they were ready, they exploited a command injection vulnerability that allowed them to execute their code on the underlying Linux OS. So Velvet Shell was deployed on the machine. Once Velvet Shell was running, the threat actors were able to tunnel their traffic through the Nexus switch and into their objectives inside of the network. So as we mentioned before, we do the investigation, and in parallel, we want to set some monitoring. Why? Because we know that there is a live threat actor in the network. we know that they are operating on the Cisco Nexus switch, and we want to be able to identify this activity. However, stealth monitoring is not something that you can easily implement on Nexus switches. You cannot just do network tapping because the amount of traffic that this device handles in 1 minute is huge. So you have to resort to the built-in mechanisms that Cisco provides on the switches. First, you can use syslog. There are different levels of syslog, and it will allow you to understand which commands were executed in the device, who connected, and from where. My tip for you is to test your syslog implementation, because if you don't, you will be missing crucial information such as source IP address and source username. Another option is to use the built-in NetFlow mechanism, which will give you visibility into the traffic so you'll be able to understand what the threat actor is doing. It's not stealth, but it gives you pretty good visibility. Okay, so we investigated a Nexus switch, we know it's compromised, and we see that the threat actor is attempting to perform lateral movement. So now we need to verify that there are no additional compromised Nexus switches in the organization. And this was a large environment with hundreds of Nexus devices. And we had to understand how to scale the investigation. So we understood that we need to formulate some sort of threat hunting methodology and define our questions. We needed to understand which data is relevant to collect, how can we know that the device was compromised, and the challenge here was the 2 layers of the device, because it's easy to collect commands from the NXOS application layer. You can collect a lot of information from there, but the threat actor is operating on the underlying Linux, and you cannot collect information from there easily. You need to contact Cisco, and you need to request their assistant. So what we decided to do is we decided to hunt on the NXOS layer, and if we find something suspicious, then we will need to manually investigate the underlying Linux OS. So we created a methodology, and now we just need to collect the relevant data in order to hunt. This is also a bit of a challenge. Our client had a central management solution that managed the Cisco switches, but not all of them. So for some of the switches, we could use a single solution to collect the evidence, but for the unmanaged devices, we needed to create our own script that would connect remotely, collect the evidence, and allow us to investigate. It was a long and challenging process, but it was fruitful. We were able to find an additional compromised Nexus switch. Also, the threat actor leveraged the same zero-day and deployed Velvet Shell there. So we finalized the investigation. We updated the Velvet Hunt ID. It now also includes Velvet Shell.
Okay, so until this point, we managed to understand that APTs are actually persistent, okay? And for that, let's do a side-by-side comparison of how the different threat actors, threat actor beta and Velvet Hunt, have responded to our operations and what is their persistency in their methodology. So let's start with threat actor beta. Threat actor beta, post the kill switch, tried to access the web shell from the same C2. However, the web shell was deleted as part of the kill switch, and it was detected by our monitoring, so it was failed. Next, they tried to access the same web shell from a different IP address. They still did not really aware of what exactly happened. It was failed since the web shell was deleted, and it was detected by our monitoring. Next, they tried to perform some kind of a new exploitation, some kind of a deserialization attack, and then they deployed a ghost web shell, a memory residing only web shell. So this was a success for them. However, we were able to detect and respond immediately since we monitored for the TTP of web shells, which is a process that is being spawned from a web server process. And this was done given the fact that we were able to monitor on TTPs that are related to threat actor beta.
Okay, so APTs are persistent in their attempt to regain access to the network, but they are also persistent within the network, trying to establish their hold on the network. So with Velvet Hunt, when they started their activity, they were out in the open, working on laptops, working on systems that had direct internet access. That worked for them for years. Then we implemented the first eradication, we cleaned them, and they responded. They moved to work from legacy servers that were not monitored. They also tried different changes to their tools. They thought that it will make the payload execute, and they were right, because when they changed the hash or when they changed the implementation of tools such as in-packet, the EDR stopped blocking them, but we had alternate monitoring in place and alerts were being triggered. Then they switched to working from network devices. First, from the external facing F5 device that was in the parameter network, and then from the Nexus devices, which are deep inside of the network. There are very few organizations that monitor network devices such as Nexus switches. So you won't have any visibility, but once the threat actor attempts to perform lateral movement and access other areas of the network that are monitored, alerts should be triggered and you will be able to catch them.
So what we see here common for both of them, that they have the persistency, and in terms of threat actor beta, it was the regaining access, and for the Velvet Hunt, it was to reestablish access in the network in new ways. And both actors were detected since we implemented the TTP-based monitoring as a post-breach monitoring after the kill switch, okay? This was imperative in order to detect them, to detect their persistency attempt, and to identify what they are trying to do in response to our activities. So let's move on to our key takeaways from this session. First, lucrative targets and large organizations might have several threat actors operated in parallel within the same environment, right? Different APTs that are working in the same environment might have different motivations, and the motivation is affecting their persistency. For example, if we'll take an extortion kind of attacks, then there is some kind of a cost effective that they need to calculate, and if their attack is no longer beneficial, then they might stop it. But in comparing to that, attacks that are conducted by an espionage motivated threat actors will be probably more persistent because the need for data will probably always be there. So they will be a bit more persistent. Next is a response to an APT will draw a response from an APT. And this is crucial in order to understand how and what should we do as the blue teamers. And for example, in the China Nexus, they are trying to reestablish the operation. So we will need to implement some kind of the post-breach monitoring and the visibility enhancement in order to catch them. So this is a crucial part in order to detect them. So, and last but not least is the, maybe it can sound like a cliche, but this is the persistency of us, of the blue team, in order to fight these APTs, okay? We should be more persistent than the advanced persistent threat. Only by understanding that this is not a singular battle, but an ongoing war with them, this mindset will give us the dedication and persistency in order to fight them back, to detect them every time, and to successfully respond to that. So with that being said, we have just published a new blog post about Velvet Hunt talking about the Velvet Shell, and in the upcoming future, we will publish more information about threat actor beta. And this is a great opportunity to give a shout out to the amazing Sygnia incident response and remediation team members that worked day and night in order to bring you this wonderful content. And also a shout out to our client that understood that this is an ongoing war and they need to be resilient and dedicated to this investigation and response effort. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.